have road anxieties like your daughter, and tell them how windy the road so that you can prepare them for their journey, especially if they got road anxieties. And I looked at my queen and I said, you know what? That's one of the reasons why I thank God every morning when I wake up in the morning and do my little prayer while I wake up. I thank God every day that you're in my life because you add perspective. And she said, that's okay because you're a man. I believe God put women here in your lives to add perspective to your life. That little gray line in between black and white that men don't really pay attention to. There's perspective in all of that. I'm willing to give that to you. And I believe that's why God put women into your, me into your life. And I said, well, thank God for that. All right. So moving forward, we're going to get into Captain Cook's for the next 24 miles from here. This road is going to dip, twist, and turn. Right? When we get closer to the roads where it's going to straighten out, I am also going to let you guys know before we get on the straighter roads, to let you know that the windy roads are done and more straighter roads are to come. Okay? But as you guys can see, this is how it's twisting and turning that I'm telling you guys about. It's pretty much going to do just like this majority of the way. So for 24 miles, it's going to be like this, okay? Somewhat like this, and then it's going to straighten out. So let's just get into Captain Cook's story. So before I get into Captain James Cook, let's talk a little bit about what I was able to find out about young James Cook. So you understand how he rose from common birth to actually becoming a very well-known name throughout history, right? Little pretext to Captain Cook. There isn't very much information about Captain James Cook when he was just young James Cook, because he was born of common birth. He wasn't born to a noble family. Okay. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that young James came from very humble beginnings. He didn't have a lot, but they had things. But they didn't have a lot of things. And one thing about young James Cook that I found out, apparently young James Cook had an affinity for the ocean, the seas, and a love for the seas, and a high regard or affinity, like I was saying. But I also found out that young James Cook was actually a brilliant young mind. He could retain information very, very well. Okay, and it was only evident that he was going to want to become a sailor. One of the things I found out that he believed in 1800s, and that's from 1699 to 1801. In the 1800s, the model of ship that they were using, James Cook, young James Cook, believed that these were magnificent feats of human engineering. And he marveled at these ships. It was only evident to his family that this boy was going, because of his love for the sea, he was going to become a sailor someday or another. It was going to draw him to the sea. Right? And that's exactly what happened with young James Cook. But like I said, he didn't have very much money, and his family didn't have enough money to send him on great adventures on the sea on top of these ships and go on vacations like that. They couldn't afford it. But just because they couldn't afford it didn't mean that young James Cook wasn't going to keep his dream to become a sailor. You see, he wanted to become a sailor so bad that any free time that he had, from what I found out, any free time that he had, he would spend most of that time at the port where the ships come in. And what he was doing down there is he would literally go down there, marvel at the ships, but not only that, he went down there to listen to the stories of these sailors, of their great adventures. So much so that he was even caught a few times inside of the pubs and taverns, which he wasn't actually supposed to be in there. But he snuck his way in there because it's the pubs and taverns where the sailors tell their stories. They talk about where they've been, the kind of things that they encountered on their adventures or journeys from port to port and all of this. And he would listen to all of these things and just build and be inspired by these stories to even more want to become a sailor. But because he couldn't afford to do it, it didn't mean he was going to forget what his dream was and stop dreaming to become a sailor. At 13, 14 years old, young James Cook decided that if he can't afford to be on one of these ships, the next best thing, he could work on it. If he could find employment on one of these merchant ships that come into the area, he'd be able to work and learn how these ships work through work experience while working on top of the ship. He would learn through work how these ships work, the ticks and talks of the ship itself. So at 13, 14 years old, young James Cook went looking for work on a merchant at the port. And there was a merchant ship captain that gave him his shot. Right? And employed young James Cook. Now, I'm just going to ad-lib a little bit here. I couldn't find any information towards this, but I believe young James Cook went home and gathered all of his things and said goodbye to mom and dad. Basically, they're going to say goodbye to him because he's about to live out his dream. He's finally going to get his chance to travel on top of these vessels. Right? And so he goes back to the ship. They leave the port. About almost 3 days later, they're about ready to pull into a different port where they're going to be doing business. That merchant ship's going to be doing business in there. All right. Now, before the merchant ship pulls into port, the captain calls out to young James Cook, and he said, "Yes, young James, come. I would like to have a little bit of a conversation with you." And so I'm guessing young James came up and said, "Yes, Captain." All right. And the captain looked at him with a smile. From what I found out, he smiled at young James and said, "Yes, young James, you know, I, along with some of the men on board the ship, have actually been quite impressed with your work ethics. It hasn't been a single thing that we have asked you to do since you got onto the ship that you didn't go right into it and do it. And if you, what impressed me the most was the fact that if you didn't know how to do the job in which we required you to do, you would ask someone who knows how to do that to show you how to do it. And then you would take it away from them and you would repeat that process and go and do it. We usually don't hire young men like young boys like yourself, because young boys like yourself, not all of them are meant for the sea, but it seems like you are meant for the sea." And I thought to myself, I wanted to go have a conversation with this young man and basically ask you, why are you here, young James? And young James Cook basically said back to the captain and said, "I have an affinity for the sea. I have always wanted to become a sailor. I believe that these ships are magnificent feats of human engineering. And I always wanted to be a part of it, to learn how these ships go. I will do anything you ask. You have given me the opportunity, and I'm very grateful for it, to live out my dream, Captain. As long as I'm on top of this ship, there will be anything you ask me to do, I will do it. Because this is part of what I want to learn. I want to be a sailor. It is in my heart." So begins the relationship between captain, crew, and young James Cook, who becomes a part of that crew. Now, he didn't work on top of the merchant ship forever, but I will tell you, he acquired a lot of knowledge while working on the ship. It was his plan of what he was going to do. He was learning everything about maps, about depth, or what they measured in fathoms, and all of those things. They talked about all of these things, knowing about mapping and how things work, where shallow shoals are and reef systems that can be hidden by during different times of the year.